trying to steal the 2020 election. Any such indictment would be Donald Trump's third overall and is especially significant for three reasons. One, this would be the first ever indictment of Trump for actions taken as president. The pending DOJ indictment of Trump right now, of course, is all about taking classified material after he left office. And that New York case is about what he did, allegedly, in 2016 before assuming office. Second reason this is big tonight, while no indictment, of course, is a small matter, there are signs that DOJ is now targeting Trump for the most serious potential crimes yet. Allegations that he, to put it straight up, operated as a criminal president, abused powers, and tried to end democracy itself. No modern president has faced this kind of potential case since Richard Nixon, who, of course, then scored a partisan pardon from his successor to avoid what was seen as a likely prosecution and possible incarceration. Third reason this is really big. If DOJ brings this case, it won't turn on Trump and his personal valet or long-lost executives or lawyers from the pre-presidency or the business side of the operation. Any conspiracy charges, if they are brought, and I'm telling you tonight, Jack Smith is targeting Donald Trump and potentially co-conspirators, any such charges would seem to lead to the powerful co-conspirators who served Trump in that critical 2020 stretch as he tried several plots with the same goal, a coup to end democracy, to overthrow the incoming administration of then President-elect Biden. We're talking about the several plots that have been exposed by journalistic investigations and government evidence that we and others have been tracking for 2 years now, some of which you see on your screen. And none of these have been federally charged yet. So this is a huge deal. And the first indication that Smith targeted Trump came from the target himself, Donald Trump, now posting online today that he was told he was a target by the DOJ and the Smith probe on Sunday, and that he gets 4 days to report to the grand jury, which almost always means an arrest and indictment. Trump referring to the fact that to get this letter is basically a precursor to being arrested, and that is true. Now, the existence of this target letter has now been independently confirmed, and beyond the customary notification about the right to face the grand jury, it also states something that nobody wants to hear if it's directed at you, that the DOJ, through its voluminous process and its grand jury interviews and its FBI probes and its subpoenas and its searches, now has evidence linking him, and the big him here is Donald Trump, linking him to a crime. So this is a big deal. And if you're saying, okay, Ari, I've heard about indictments before, I've heard about accountability before, I'm tired of all this, that's fine. You could be tired. You could tune out. You could turn it off. This stuff takes time. And whether you like it or not, presidents, while in office, are basically completely legally protected from these DOJ probes. So yes, it takes time, but now here, within under a year of Special Counsel Smith's appointment, you have one indictment on the Mar-a-Lago stuff, which is post-presidency, and now you have the targeting of Trump for the big enchilada, the coup that tried to steal more than your vote, tried to steal your democracy. So, hey, if it's not going fast enough for you, so be it. And any defendant is presumed innocent legally. But I'm telling you, this target letter is for the biggest charges yet. And here's how the news broke today.
Coffee with food? Not so fast.
Yeah. Some significant breaking news. Perhaps the most significant indictment may be coming Donald Trump's way.
Donald Trump on Truth Social says that on Sunday night, he received a Justice Department letter.
We have some breaking news coming in. Former President Donald Trump putting out a statement, instantly making his legal troubles once again the top issue in his 2024 campaign to retake the White House.
Trump now racing for 3 trials. And the process here can actually be gleaned from some of those other cases. I mentioned classified documents, also overseen by Special Counsel Smith, who informed Trump that he was the target on May 19th. And 3 weeks later, the indictment came down, if you're looking for a recent example of how long does this take or can it take. Now, 3 weeks is fast by legal standards. Smith has only been in this job for 8 months. And DOJ keeps its own timeline, but something may be in the air tonight, because we can also report the first ever charges against Trump's fraudulent electors. Remember then? Remember all of them? 16 people now indicted for that plot in Michigan. First time that's ever happened separate probe, and we have more on that state process for you later tonight. It's clear prosecutors are following the evidence that was both exposed and then sort of emphasized and narrated by the January 6th committee. And again, there was the series of evidence that expanded the understanding of how broad the plots were, as we've shown you here, at least 8 designed to thwart the transition to President-elect Biden. And about 6 of them, roughly, carry at least legal exposure, which prosecutors, state or federal, might charge. Again, if they're doing their jobs, which they would only charge if they have the facts and the evidence on a nonpartisan basis. Now, as of tonight, no federal charges have hit anyone for those coup plots yet, but the target letter does suggest they are coming. Another way to say that is, unless something else interferes or intercedes, as Trump said and as lawyers say and as DOJ precedent shows, you would expect charges to come after this target letter, although we are not reporting charges yet. But it's all coming in the context of that evidence that came through and the Trump lawyers even admitting parts of these plots.
That was part of the process to make sure there were alternate electors. Everything that was done illegally by the Trump legal team, according to the rules and under the leadership of Rudy Giuliani.
We had over 100 congressmen and senators on Capitol Hill ready to implement the sweep. The remedy was for Vice President Pence, as the quarterback in the Green Bay sweep, to remand those votes back to the 6 battleground states.
Do you realize you are describing a coup?
No.
No. Mr. Navarro there has since been indicted. He awaits trial from the fallout over his allegedly illegal defiance of the congressional probe. Mr. Epstein is still overseeing other lawyers on Trump's legal team. He has appeared on this and other programs before. He has not done as many interviews lately. The reports are both those individuals have faced the long arm of the law, including having phones seized in Epstein's case. Now, it was an attempted coup. We know that. This elector fraud under scrutiny. We know that continued all the way up to January 6th with GOP senators trying to put those fraudulent election materials in the hands of VP Pence. You can see in this schematic that we made, basically, an actual text they thought would remain secret of a VP Pence aide trying to prevent the elector fraud and forgeries to be handed to Pence. That was all right around there, middle of the day. That was one more thwarted scheme, as then Trump supporters turned to the physical insurrection. And that now indicted sedition looks even worse with this evidence that I've told you about, because we know that Trump first summoned those people to Washington for what became the sedition on the very night that his other plot to seize the voting machines failed after this infamously unhinged meeting, which we now know Jack Smith is also probing.
What they were proposing, I thought was nuts. Flynn screamed at me that I was a quitter and everything, kept on standing up and turning around and screaming at me.
Sidney Powell was fighting. Mike Flynn was fighting.
You did get to see the president without an appointment.
We did.
I didn't understand how they had gotten in.
People shouting at each other, hurling insults at each other.
And I stayed in the cabinet room, which is kind of cool. I really like that. All by myself.
We were pushing back and we were asking one simple question as a general matter. Where is the evidence?
Now that meeting matters because it was illicit, which is why the participants literally snuck into the White House. Some of the proposals were criminal, why even Giuliani warned the plan would land them in prison. And that's why all of this is under criminal investigation today, with a new warning for Trump that he's targeted for coup charges. Others have gone to prison for Jan 6, we know that. Trump fans, militia leaders. But the apparent people at the top have not yet been held accountable. Now the question is, what does it mean tonight, amidst all this, when special counsel Jack Smith sends a coup warning like this to former President Trump?
Hey, I'm Joey, and I'm one of the...
What does it mean when special counsel Smith sends a target letter like this?
Well, let me tell you from the perspective of a defense lawyer. The last thing you ever want in the world is to get a target letter, because a target letter means to you you're done. It means you're going to get indicted, and it doesn't get sent. You know, it's not like a subpoena. Prosecutors can send subpoenas out like it's nothing. But a target letter is a big deal, and it's a big deal when they receive even in the Trump camp, it must have set off an awful lot of alarms, meaning what do we do next because I'm about to be indicted?
And from a prosecutorial perspective, you mentioned both sides, but is it a bigger deal to try to go at the conduct of a sitting president? I went through the distinctions here in the other cases.
Well, never having gone after a sitting president, it's hard to say. It certainly is a historic moment because, you know, and it's a sad moment, right? And I think from a prosecutor's standpoint, it's a sad moment, too, that as a prosecutor, I have to do this. I have to make this type of history. It's a sad state of affairs, but it has to be done, and we're going to do it by dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and that's why we sent the target letter.
And Christy, to the same point, you have to have good evidence if you're in those shoes because, again, part of the Mar-a-Lago case, and we'll get to they had a hearing today, is telling the defendant and the jury he's not president anymore. So he's trying to president, right? He's trying to do classified stuff, nuclear stuff. He's not president. That seems to be a pretty clear line. Here, you have to have enough evidence to be able to repel the defense lawyers or the jury's feeling of, well, can a sitting president ask the DOJ to look into things? I mean, can he hold a meeting? Is that, in that sense, a higher bar, and do you think Smith has the goods?
I think he has the goods. I think what we're looking at here are very clear paths that the special counsel has to moving forward. You have forged documents with this fake elector scheme. That is not something that would be within presidential duties or immunities. This is something where you have clear fraudulent conduct. You then have trying to stop the count, trying to obstruct a proceeding before Congress. Again, not something that's within his presidential duties. And then the last one, looking to incite an insurrection, you know, inflaming his base and then sitting on his hands and doing nothing when violence broke out. So none of these things are presidential. He's not going to have any kind of defensive privilege or immunity for any of these acts if he's charged with them.
He would say, we'll expect his lawyers to say, well, he can have a meeting with Pence. He can ask him to do things. He can have his lawyers come in. Oh, they have a certification? He could send his folks down there. We've seen all these kind of lower stakes but sort of silly arguments about who's a part of what branch and you oversee the Senate and, you know, without getting too far into a law school rabbit hole, they're going to be pushing back on Smith and all this stuff and saying, even if you stipulate he was incorrect, even if you stipulate that he was lying, politicians have been known to lie in both parties, you have to have more on him than just he held some meetings and wanted to go down to the Congress to make his final case.
Yeah, I think it is more than that based on what's in the public record, right? So you have him, first of all, knowing that there was no election fraud. He was told time and again by DOJ officials, by his own White House counsel, you know, by AG Barr, people he appointed told him there was no election fraud, yet he kept on saying it. He used it as a pretext for this plan. So then you have, yes, this fake elector scheme where there are people who are saying we were duly elected. That's just plainly false. Right. So again, you can have meetings, you can have intellectual conversations, but when you know that people are going in there and forging documents that are sent to a government agency, that's fraud, plain and simple.
Yeah. And the mindset is interesting. Again, you can't use that as defense to everything, but it seems to hurt Trump as a potential defendant, David, that he did know he lost, that he'd been lying about a lot of things. You know, I don't know, did you ever see The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan documentary? Yeah. You get the feeling that Jordan sort of can hack his own brain and convince himself he's been disrespected, use it as fuel. Then later he says, I knew, you know, I pushed that. I wouldn't compare the two of them in many ways. But as far as delusion, let me play you some of the evidence, David, where, according to his own aides at the time, Trump would lie in public and then show consciousness of guilt, mental state privately. I know I lost, as he said it regarding the now president, Biden. He said, I can't believe I lost to this expletive guy. Take a look.
Hey, you know, this time of year, we all keep getting pinged with political fundraising.
So we're in the Oval. He says words to the effect of, yeah, we lost. We need to let that issue go to the next guy, meaning President Biden.
And he was looking at the TV and he said, can you believe I lost to this effing guy?
And I said, like, does the president really think that he lost? And he said, you know, a lot of times he'll tell me that he lost, but he wants to keep fighting it.
So to the extent that he tries to propagate that that he really, despite what they said, that he really did believe it. It's not a reasonable belief based on all the evidence, number one. Number two, and what Christy was talking about really speaks to, it's not just it's his corrupt intent that is going to undo him here, because yes, he can have meetings, and yes, he can meet with Vice President Pence, and yes, he can suggest they look into election fraud. But when he knew that he lost and what he's asking them to do, there's a corrupt intent behind it, and that intent was to disrupt the functioning of Congress, to certify the election, and to essentially incite an insurrection.
How important is it, do you think, that there is potential accountability here for co-conspirators? Again, we don't have any charges yet. We have a target letter, but there is the implication that it would go out beyond Trump. And we're living through a time where he's running for office again. A lot of people have been asked to do things. Does it matter? Is it good for democracy if other people are held accountable? So even when they're in a big, powerful job, in the back of their mind, they're thinking, it's not open season.
Right. So you have that unhinged meeting that happens in December. It reminds me of Succession, where you have Logan Roy telling his children, I love you, but you're not serious people. And Trump brought in a bunch of people who are not serious people to replace the serious people who are telling him, you lost, you can't declare martial law, you can't do all of these kinds of crazy things that you're thinking to try to steal the election. So he brings in a bunch of other people who will tell him what he wants to hear and help him execute a fraudulent plan. And so some of those were lawyers. You know, we know John Eastman, Rudy Giuliani, and you can't hide behind a law degree to help your client commit a fraud, right? That's clearly illegal. So, and you see so many of these lawyers have lost their law licenses or being suspended or disbarred in their states because of that.
Is Sidney Powell then, is that Shiv or is that Kendall? It's your comparison.
I'm going to go with Kendall.
Okay, Kendall.
Tortured, yes.
Yeah. Any of the above?
I never watched the show.
You're too busy. Yeah, we get it. Yeah, some of us watch HBO.
What's interesting about this, Ari, is that Trump is the only one reported to have received the target letter.
Yep.
And it would be interesting, I think it'd be hard to conceal if others received a target letter. Now, not every target needs to get a target letter, but if you're going to give it to one, you're likely to give it to the others. But in the same time, I'd be really surprised if he went forward here and charged, particularly if it's a conspiracy case, only Trump. So a lot remains to be seen.
Yeah, wouldn't you see? I mean, again, we're going to be responsible about this. We don't have the reporting, but the indication would be that he'd have one or more other individuals, unless they're super cooperative, because you can have an unindicted co-conspirator. But would you look to Powell, Eastman, Giuliani, those types?
Yes, those were the people that were referred from the House Select Committee. But what's interesting is within the last few hours, attorneys for John Eastman and Rudy Giuliani both said they did not receive target letters. So maybe those are forthcoming, but I know we'll be staying tuned. But it is interesting. I agree. You would expect if there were conspiracy charges, other co-conspirators to be charged.